Hello, my name is Carl. I'm from Denmark, so usually I'm making videos in Danish. I'm making this video in English. The occasion, the primary occasion, is as a friendly gesture to my fellow YouTuber and Beatles fan Shotton, who had a video about a CD with some early Beatles material. That part of the Beatles story is a thing I had spent a lot of time studying. And yes, I said, okay, this is the occasion I saw this video and this is a friendly gesture, but of course it's public and anyone can watch, and I hope that this video will find its way to people who are interested in the subject. And I have planned to make a series of videos. So this is just the first episode. I will take things from the start. Well, sort of. You can always go further back, and at some point you will end with Adam and Eve or something like that, or the Big Bang or whatever. I will not go that far back, but probably most Beatles fans have heard about the beginning with the Quarrymen, John Lennon's school band, and have heard something about being a skiffle band. I don't know how much they know about what skiffle actually is. They might know that it has something to do with using a washboard. And I guess most Beatles fans have heard that famous story about John Lennon smashing the washboard into the head of his schoolmate and near friend, Pete Shotton. You should think that would be the end of that friendship, but it actually wasn't. They kept being near friends all through the Beatles area. So that's not it. But what about skiffle? Well, I'm very much into skiffle, and I could talk for hours of skiffle, and I have actually done that in some Danish-speaking videos I made some years ago. I think it was 62 episodes or something, where I was talking and talking and talking of everything that has anything to do with skiffle. I won't do that here. I will try. That's not my strong side, but I would try to keep things to the point and just the most important things. This thing called the skiffle craze was a trend, fashion, call it what you want, in the mid to late 50s in England. It was inspired by another wave or trend that happened in jazz called the revival movement. Back in the 40s, well, a bit earlier, to take it from the beginning, in the late 30s came what has been known as swing music. Big orchestras and most of them white musicians, Glenn Miller Orchestra, Artie Shaw, that kind of thing. Benny Goodman, let's not forget about Benny Goodman and and his use of black musicians, that was actually a bit of a revolution at the time, that he was playing with such guys as Lionel Hampton, Charlie Christian, and such guys. And to begin with, there were it was something new happened in jazz, and that was fine. But then came the Second World War. And you know, people with bombs flying around their heads, they liked to calm down a bit and have some sweet music, and that affected the swing music. And from being something vital, it turned more and more into some, excuse my French, sentimental shit. And there were two reactions to that, very opposite. There was one party that sort of saying, we must go back to the roots, back to find the real jazz, the jazz as it was meant to be from the beginning. And they were extreme purists. And they were searching in the area of New Orleans to find old musicians that had been there in the beginning. There was such a guy as Bunk Johnson. He was not a young man anymore. Actually, he hadn't got any teeth, but they collected some money and they gave him a protest, and he could play the trumpet again, and now he should show all those youngsters how to play the real jazz. That was the revival movement. The opposite movement was the modernists saying, we gotta take a step forward. Things have changed, the world have changed, it's another world now. And I mean, at the end of Second World War, you know, all heard about the atom bomb. A very dangerous thing, a kind of destruction no one had seen before. And all that thing about this is something humans have made. You know, in older times you hear religious stories about such a destruction coming from a higher power. But humans making such a destruction. And there was this feeling of everything going faster and faster, the old world being more slow, and suddenly all things going crazy and very wild and very fast and all that. And there also, that was another thing, you know, all the racist stuff, especially in USA, and of course especially in the southern USA. And you know, there was a new generation of black people that they couldn't connect with that, you know, that cotton picker image. Actually, many of them were very well educated. Miles Davis, his father was a dentist. And, you know, such things. So, and, you know, all those guys like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and those guys, they were making what has been called bebop. That's the modern thing. Okay. From the revival movement, it got very popular it started in the USA, and I told you about finding Bunk Johnson in New Orleans and all that, but it got very popular in Europe, and it took a kind of special direction in England. There was this guy, Ken Colyer, and he actually traveled and visited New Orleans to meet all those real jazz musicians of the old school, and actually got arrested there. So he's got a great deal of street credibility for that. He was a purist, really, as much purist as they get. And he was really into that thing about finding the real jazz and play it like it was meant to be. Like at least as he thought it was meant to be. Of course, the modernist was of an other opinion. He got this idea about when he was playing a concert, and there was this traditional jazz lineup. You got the trumpet, you got the trombone, and you got the clarinet. That was the blowing instruments. But then, in the middle of the concert, having a few songs, putting the blow instruments away and just taking some guitars and playing some old blues songs and saying, okay, now you gotta learn. We must educate you a little bit about the origins of all this. So here are some old blues songs and so that sort of things. And they were drawing, no, that's not the word. They were, well, they were inspired by, I can say, a tradition in jazz that has been called jug music or spasm bands. Jug, yes, a jug for whiskey. And you all had tried to, in a bottle, that sound you can make there. And that was the basic of jug music. That was the kind of the bass, or the bottom in the music, making a bass sound and keeping the rhythm. And there was this tradition about using very primitive instruments, such as washboard. Yes, there. In blues and jazz, some of you may have heard about a guy called Washboard Sam. Well, I guess you can figure out what he was playing, what kind of instrument. And that was sort of the inspiration, playing primitive music on primitive instruments. It started with this idea Ken Colyer had about an almost educative intermezzo saying, okay, listen, this was how it went on in the old cotton fields, but it turned into something else. There were some of the guys that played with Ken Colyer, but maybe thought he was a little bit too puristic, and maybe they were a bit more open to other kinds of ideas. Were such guys as Chris Barber, Lonnie Donegan, and some few more. And later on, when they break off, Lonnie Donegan was singing and playing banjo in Chris Barber's orchestra, and there was a specific session where they had recorded the songs they should record, but they saying, hey, can we do something else? And the sound engineer thought, and well, he just kept the tape running and went out to lunch and said, well, let them have their fun. Among those songs was an old Leadbelly song. You heard of Judy Ledbetter. An old Leadbelly song called The Rock Island Line. Quite well known, in folk communities. And they were playing a version of that song. And later on, that very informal, what do you call it? Session was released, and that Rock Island Line became a big hit in England. And it was at the same time as rock and roll broke through in USA. When Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel was climbing up the hit list in USA, Lonnie Donegan's Rock Island Line was climbing up the hit list in England. And that was the beginning of the skiffle craze. And what that have meant to a lot of those who became famous in the different groups in the 60s. Well, you can hear them talk about it, and it's almost everybody from that generation that was deeply infected by that. It had an enormous impact. How come? Well, England, still in the 50s, had deep scars after the Second World War. England was poor. There were some few well-to-do families, but in most cases, let's say a child saying to its parents, well, I like to play the clarinet. Well, the parents couldn't just say, okay, we buy a clarinet for you and we find a teacher and pay for some lessons. They couldn't afford that. They could hardly, they could just about get enough to eat. So it wasn't possible. And most music education and school was kind of boring. If some child were interested in music and well, they could say sing in a church choir or something, it wasn't like there was so many possibilities. And most of the music played in English radio at that time was dance band music.